I think it's safe to say that change is on my agenda. Change for good. And I embrace that and I enjoy that change. I don't fear it.
The decision was not softened, delayed, or hidden behind ceremonial language. William had made his choice. Camilla was being removed from the Kensington Suite, and the residence was being formally reassigned to Princess Catherine. One signature transformed what had seemed like a private royal arrangement into a deeply personal declaration of trust, authority, and future direction. And when the news reached the family, the silence became almost as powerful as the decision itself. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William sat with the final papers in front of him and read the last page twice. His hand did not move immediately. The residence order, a formal household document recording who would occupy the suite, carried far more weight than a simple change of rooms. Inside this dramatized royal household, proximity meant access, trust, and influence, and Kensington stood close to the center of the future king's family life. He knew exactly how the decision would be read. He also knew that once his signature touched the page, Camilla would see more than administration. She would see rejection. The pen finally moved. William signed. The prince placed it down without ceremony, but the choice was now fixed. Catherine had not been in the room. She had not watched him reach the decision, and she had not asked to be handed another woman's residence. That was why her reaction carried such force when the message reached her. She read the notice once, then again, stunned that the suite had been formally placed in her use under the new household arrangement. The future queen understood immediately that this was not a temporary gesture. It was a declaration about where William believed the center of his household belonged. Camilla received her notification in private. She held the letter, read the opening lines, and then lowered it slowly to the table. "When was this decided?" she asked. The queen consort did not raise her voice, but the anger underneath the question was unmistakable. For her, the suite had represented more than comfort. It meant nearness to the people shaping the monarchy's next chapter, and losing it meant being moved farther from that inner circle. The most unsettling detail came last. Catherine had been named the recognized occupant, making the transfer far harder to reverse than Camilla had expected. William had not merely asked her to leave, he had redrawn a boundary. Something had changed. And the question now hanging over Kensington was brutally simple. What had happened before this signature that convinced him the old arrangement could no longer continue? Behind the residence dispute were three very different fears. William feared losing control of the future household he was expected to inherit. Catherine feared becoming the symbol of a family division she had never asked to lead. And Camilla feared something more intimate than losing rooms inside Kensington. She feared being quietly pushed away from the center of royal life. What appeared to be a property decision had become a test of belonging. Catherine looked at William differently after reading the transfer notice. She understood why Kensington mattered to him, because these rooms were tied to the family structure he was building around her and their children. For the prince, controlling that space meant protecting the independence of the household he would one day carry into a new reign. But she also understood what the same decision meant to Camilla. The suite had given the queen consort proximity, influence, and a visible place close to the center of family decisions. Losing it could never feel like a simple move. Catherine chose her words carefully. She told William she did not want the residence if accepting it meant humiliating another woman in the family. He did not answer immediately. Then the future king told her the decision had not been made to reward her or punish Camilla. Boundaries had already been crossed, and he could no longer pretend the problem was only about rooms. That answer unsettled her more than anger would have, because it suggested something had happened before the signature, something serious enough to change his mind completely. Camilla felt that absence too. She sat with untouched tea beside her and asked an aide to leave it where it was. The queen consort kept looking toward the closed door, hurt less by the formal notice than by the fact that William had not warned her himself. She had believed that whatever tension existed between them, there was still enough personal respect for a direct conversation. Now, even that assumption felt uncertain. William finally told Catherine that the real problem had begun weeks earlier inside the suite. He stopped there. The prince would not give her the full story, and she noticed the restraint immediately. This was not ordinary household friction. Someone close to them had said or done something that made the arrangement impossible to continue. Catherine did not push him. She could see that he was still carrying the weight of it. But the silence now had a shape, and it led back to one private gathering inside Kensington. At the time, it had seemed like another family evening. By the end of it, one sentence from Camilla had changed everything, and William had already begun moving toward the decision that would remove her for good. The real break did not begin with lawyers, property papers, or a formal royal order. It began during a private family dinner inside Kensington, when conversation turned toward Catherine's future household, and Camilla challenged a decision William believed was his alone to make. No cameras captured what followed. No public statement acknowledged it. Yet one exchange became the trigger that transformed years of quiet tension into a decision nobody inside the family could ignore. William had already grown frustrated by smaller disputes over who could use certain rooms, how guests were accommodated, and which staff members could make changes without consulting him. The prince had tolerated those overlaps, while Charles tried to keep the family united. But privately, he believed the household built around Catherine and their children needed clearer limits. The Prince and Princess of Wales household meant the immediate family structure, supporting William and his wife in their public and private duties. To him, that structure could not work if every decision remained open to outside interference. Catherine sensed the tension rising before anyone raised their voice. She tried to soften the conversation when the discussion turned toward rearranging part of the suite for upcoming family obligations, suggesting that practical changes could be handled without turning them into a larger argument. Camilla did not accept that. She questioned why Catherine should have the final preference over rooms that had long been used more broadly. Then the queen consort said the sentence that changed the mood completely: "Kensington does not belong to one branch of this family." William's expression hardened. The prince said nothing at first, but Catherine understood immediately that the remark had landed somewhere deeper than furniture or guest space. Camilla continued, insisting that any permanent reassignment of the Kensington Suite should require Charles's approval, not William's. That was the moment everything shifted. He quietly set down his glass and answered, "Then we understand the problem very differently." Camilla stared back at him, realizing too late that the argument had crossed into something larger. The queen consort had framed the issue as one of royal authority, and William heard it as a challenge to whether he could control the household he was expected to lead into the future. Catherine tried once more to calm the room, but the warmth had already disappeared. William remained behind with her after Camilla left. He told Catherine that the dispute was no longer about rooms. It was about whether their household could function if someone else believed final authority always rested elsewhere. The future king spoke quietly, but his decision was beginning to harden. Within days, he would ask Camilla to meet him alone. This time, there would be no dinner table, no family buffer, and no polite escape from what both of them now knew had to be said. There were no aides to absorb the tension, and no family members to soften the words. William entered the private sitting room, knowing the conversation could permanently alter his relationship with Camilla. She was already waiting. What followed was not an explosion, but something far more dangerous. A controlled confrontation, in which every sentence carried years of restrained frustration. And before either of them left, the Kensington Suite had become the symbol of a much deeper struggle. William did not waste time. He told Camilla that the problem had moved beyond one dinner and beyond one disputed room. The prince believed the arrangement had created confusion over who directed his own household, and that uncertainty could no longer continue. Camilla listened without interrupting at first. She had entered the meeting believing some compromise was still possible, perhaps shared use during certain engagements, or permission to retain a few rooms when family duties brought her back to Kensington. Camilla finally answered. She told William she had never tried to replace Catherine and had never viewed the suite as a weapon against his wife. The queen consort insisted that her place in the family still carried meaning, and she would not accept being treated as though years beside Charles had suddenly become irrelevant. The words were controlled, but the hurt beneath them was impossible to miss. William stayed calm. He told her that respect for her position was not the issue. The future king said the real question was whether his family could make decisions inside its own household without every boundary becoming open to challenge. Camilla heard the finality in his voice and stood from her chair. Then she asked the question both had been avoiding. "Are you asking me to leave?" William paused before answering. He met her eyes and said, "I am asking for the boundary to be respected." The prince did not raise his voice, yet the meaning was unmistakable. Camilla realized then that this was not an early discussion. He had already explored how a formal transfer could be carried out, which meant the decision had advanced much further than she had imagined. Camilla's anger shifted when William added one final truth. Catherine had urged him not to humiliate her. The princess had not engineered the removal, and had even questioned whether accepting the residence would deepen the family wound. That revelation left the queen consort with nowhere to place the blame she had carried into the room. Camilla left knowing persuasion had failed. Only one person still seemed powerful enough to stop what William had set in motion. If Charles intervened, the plan might still collapse. If he did not, the balance inside the family would change in a way nobody could pretend not to see. Charles did not react immediately. He read the proposed residence order, placed it down, and remained silent long enough for the room itself to feel uncomfortable. His wife expected loyalty. His son expected recognition of boundaries. Between them sat a deceptively simple document concerning a Kensington residence. But Charles understood that interfering would carry consequences far beyond property. For perhaps the first time, refusing to choose a side was itself going to become a choice. Camilla watched him closely, waiting for the answer she believed should be obvious. The queen consort told Charles that William's action did not feel like routine household restructuring. To her, it felt like a warning that she would never fully belong inside the royal world his son was preparing to lead. The king understood why the pain ran so deep. William was increasingly shaping the private structure of his own family household, while Charles still carried the symbolic authority of the crown. Challenging that boundary would mean more than defending a room. It would mean openly overruling his son inside the space he was expected to command. Charles looked down at the document again. The residence order had been written around William's authority over his immediate household, which meant stopping it would require a direct confrontation rather than a quiet adjustment. The monarch could feel the weight of both sides. Camilla wanted protection. His son wanted independence, and both expected him to prove where he stood. Camilla finally asked him to intervene. She told Charles that she could accept change, but not the feeling of being pushed aside, as though the next royal era had already decided there was no meaningful place left for her. The queen consort's voice softened as she spoke, and that hurt made his answer harder, not easier. Charles told her he could not demand control over William's home while also expecting him to prepare for kingship. The king admitted the decision was painful, but forcing his son to retreat would only deepen the conflict and make every future household disagreement a question of royal authority. Camilla understood the answer before he finished speaking. He was not going to stop the transfer. Charles left one condition behind. He asked that Camilla be given enough time to remove her personal belongings privately, without staff pressure or public embarrassment. The monarch could not save the suite for her, but he could still protect her dignity while she surrendered it. Camilla said little after that. The queen consort had entered hoping Charles would reverse William's decision. Instead, his refusal became the final confirmation that the transfer would move ahead. And now the paperwork was finished. The next blow would not come from a signature, but from walking back into Kensington, knowing she was there only to leave. Power often disappears quietly. There was no ceremony when Camilla returned to the Kensington Suite, no formal audience, and no dramatic announcement. There were simply familiar rooms that no longer felt like hers. The official decision had survived confrontation, appeal, and family pressure. Now came the moment nobody could soften. Camilla had to confront the physical reality of being removed, while Catherine prepared to inherit a residence, carrying emotional weight she had never requested. Camilla entered knowing the argument was over. Household staff had already received discreet instructions to separate her personal possessions from furnishings and objects that belonged permanently to the residence. That practical process mattered, because it turned William's decision into something irreversible. The queen consort was no longer fighting over authority in theory. She was deciding what would leave with her and what would remain behind after she was gone. Camilla asked for a few minutes alone. She moved slowly through the space, stopped beside a familiar chair, and rested one hand against it, before saying anything. Then she asked that a small personal photograph be packed separately from the rest. The anger that had carried her through the confrontation with William was gone now. What remained was sadness, because losing the suite meant losing a place that had once made her feel securely connected to the center of royal life. Catherine refused to enter while Camilla was still there. She told William that nothing should be moved into the rooms until the queen consort had completely finished, because she would not allow the handover to look like a victory. The prince understood her instinct immediately. This decision might strengthen their household, but Catherine knew another person was suffering because of it. Catherine finally received word that Camilla had left. She hesitated before stepping into the suite and told William that she felt another woman's loss more strongly than any excitement about gaining the residence. The future king listened, then handed her the final administrative papers. Among them was the detail she had not fully understood before. Catherine read that the suite had been designated for the long-term needs of their immediate family, not merely placed in her personal use. That changed everything. William was not simply giving her rooms. He was building part of the household they were expected to carry into the next reign, creating a stable center for their family before greater responsibility arrived. Catherine looked at him differently after that. She understood the transfer was not meant to celebrate Camilla's exclusion. It was meant to define what came next, and that realization led her toward a question William had not expected: whether the suite could become a symbol of responsibility instead of victory. After days of documents, confrontation, and royal positioning, the decisive emotional moment happened with only William and Catherine present. No advisors, no household secretaries, no competing claims. Catherine asked the question nobody else had put to him. Was he giving her the Kensington Suite because she needed it, or because he needed the monarchy to see what he had chosen? William's answer turned a bitter family dispute into something far more personal. Catherine had waited until the transfer was complete before pressing him. She knew the residence now carried symbolism far beyond its rooms, and she wanted to understand exactly what William expected it to represent. The prince told her he needed their household to have clear, predictable boundaries, as her role beside him continued to grow. For him, that mattered, because uncertainty inside the family could become weakness once greater responsibility arrived. Their home had to feel settled before the monarchy around them changed. Catherine did not accept the explanation without challenge. She told William she would not allow the suite to become a monument to Camilla's defeat. If she was going to occupy it, then the residence had to stand for continuity, family, and stability, rather than triumph over another woman. The future king listened carefully, because her objection went straight to the heart of what he had been trying to protect. William finally admitted why the dinner confrontation had struck him so deeply. He had heard Camilla's words as more than a disagreement over rooms. The prince felt that his ability to protect Catherine's place inside their own household had been questioned, and that made the conflict painfully personal. His anger had been about authority, yes, but it had also been about his wife. Catherine softened after hearing that. She proposed one condition of her own. Camilla could still be welcomed into the suite for family gatherings by invitation, even though any permanent residential claim would end. The distinction mattered. The queen consort could still belong to the family, without directing the space William had chosen to place around his immediate household. He agreed. William then gave Catherine the answer she had been searching for. He told her he had signed the residence into her sphere because he trusted her not to turn proximity into power. The future king believed she would use the space to hold people together, not to prove who had won. In that moment, the decision stopped feeling like a punishment and began to look like an act of trust. Catherine understood him now. Their private agreement had finally settled the meaning inside Kensington. But outside the palace walls, nobody had heard that conversation. The transfer was already becoming a public story, and one headline was about to tell millions something far more dramatic than either of them intended. By morning, the residence transfer no longer belonged solely to the family. It was on television screens, newspaper stands, phones, and conversations outside Kensington itself. Yet one image captured the public mood more powerfully than any palace statement. Catherine entering through the gates, while photographers shouted questions about Camilla. She did not stop. She simply looked forward. In that instant, a private household decision became a national symbol of royal succession. William understood immediately that the story had escaped the language the palace preferred. Communications staff described the change as a residential reorganization, meaning a practical rearrangement of who formally uses royal living space. But the public saw something much larger. The prince was shaping the future household around Catherine, and that mattered because every decision now seemed to point toward the next reign. What had begun as a family boundary was being read as a statement about succession, loyalty, and who would stand closest to the future king. Camilla watched the early coverage with Charles nearby. She heard commentators describe Catherine as the clear center of the next royal generation, and the words landed harder than the transfer notice itself. The queen consort reached for the remote and lowered the volume rather than answer. Charles did not force a conversation. The king understood that silence was kinder in that moment, because the coverage had turned a private loss into public symbolism. Catherine felt no satisfaction when the headlines appeared. She told William she hated being presented as the winner in a contest she had never wanted. The princess worried that every photograph would make Camilla's pain look like her triumph. William told her that walking away from responsibility because others misunderstood it would allow outsiders to define the meaning of his decision. The future king reminded her that they already knew why the suite had been transferred. That truth had to matter more than the noise. Then one front page changed the tone completely. A major London morning paper appeared with the words, "William chooses his future," stretched above an image of Catherine entering Kensington. A small crowd near the palace gates began photographing the headline beside the residence, turning the newspaper itself into part of the public reaction. A broadcaster pushed the story even further. The presenter argued that the real significance was not Camilla leaving, but Charles choosing not to overturn William's decision. Suddenly the focus shifted from two women and one residence to a father quietly allowing his son to exercise authority. The world had delivered its verdict loudly, but headlines could not answer what mattered most. Only what William, Catherine, Camilla, and Charles did after the noise faded. would reveal whether the transfer had broken the family, or finally given each of them the boundary they needed. When the cameras moved on and the headlines disappeared, Kensington remained exactly where it had always been. But the relationships around it had changed. Camilla had lost the suite. Catherine had accepted it. William had established a boundary he was no longer willing to leave undefined. And Charles had chosen not to prevent his son from drawing it. The story ended not with a winner celebrating, but with 4 people finally understanding where the next royal chapter would place them. Camilla faced the final part of the handover without anger. When one remaining personal box was delivered to her, she rested a hand on it for a moment, before telling an aide there was no need to return for anything else. The Queen Consort had relinquished any permanent residential claim to the suite, meaning she no longer held a standing right to use it as her own space. That mattered because the change was now complete in practice, not merely on paper. She had lost access, but she had not been expelled from the family. Catherine entered the finished residence with William beside her and made her position clear. She would treat the Kensington Suite as a family space, not as proof that she had defeated Camilla. The princess understood that accepting the rooms came with responsibility, because every future gathering there would carry the memory of how the transfer had happened. William listened and recognized exactly why he had trusted her with the residence in the first place. She had been given proximity, but she had no desire to turn proximity into power. Charles accepted the result as well. The king understood that reversing the decision now would weaken the independence William needed before eventually carrying the crown himself. The future king could not be expected to prepare for greater authority while still being told that older household arrangements must always override his judgment. Father and son had reached an understanding without ceremony. The next generation needed room to define itself. William's decision therefore revealed its deeper meaning. The prince had not acted simply to punish Camilla. He had acted to end an ambiguity that had repeatedly placed his household, his wife, and his future authority against arrangements inherited from the previous generation. The conflict had hurt everyone involved, but it had also forced the family to confront boundaries they had avoided for too long. Camilla stepped back without being erased. Catherine stepped forward without turning the moment into revenge. Charles accepted the limit of his intervention, while William finally drew the line he believed his family needed. One old arrangement ended inside Kensington, and a new royal hierarchy became unmistakable. The door had closed on one chapter and opened on another. This time, nobody needed to ask what the decision meant.
Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.